All right, so go ahead and hit record and we'll jump in. Hey everybody, Steve Cady here at Bowling Green State University and also with Nexus for Change and the Organization Development and Change Division of the Academy of Management. And we are really fortunate to have one of our new faculty for the Doctorate in Organization Development and Change program at BGSU. Our program is just a wonderful group of people. We have a master's and a doctorate. In our doctoral program, the average age is about 47, 45 to 50 years old. We have people with a lot of experience from all over the world coming in to learn about how to advance their thought leadership and what I say in service of professional joy, which is when you publish and put your knowledge out there and share it with for the benefit of others, and you put it out in the world, you begin to step into your thought leadership. And in that, you begin serving other people and helping others in many different ways. And it opens up great doors for people as they advance their thought leadership to do more of what they love. And particularly around transforming organizations, revitalizing communities, and developing human potential. And so that's central to our program and the cohort model. And Joe, you are new with our program and just taught one of the first classes, one of your first classes with the cohort. They loved you. They thought you were awesome. I'm hearing all kinds of excitement and so forth from your experience, the way you teach, making things practical. He teaches the introduction to methods and action research in the field with the students. So he brings a great deal of knowledge, experience, a wealth of expertise. The topic is quite timely, actually. I think your uh, your description is so clear about this dilemma and what we can do about it. I'm really looking forward to learning more. So with that, what I'll do is I'll turn it over to you, Joe, and take us through. And what we'll do today, everybody, is Joe's going to share his thoughts. He'll engage in conversation with you. And then what we'll do is we'll end the last half hour in what we call the ODC, Organization Development and Change Deep Dive, in which we're going to ask Joe some questions around the field, foundational questions around the field of organization development and change, and get his perspective on those questions. And so that'll be the last half hour. So Joe, again, thank you. We're really glad to have you here. Let me turn it over to you, and I'll stop sharing, and you can share and jump in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. Let me get this started and I'll take it from where you left it. All right, everybody, see my slides?
Yes, we do.
All right, I was telling Teo, as Steve mentioned, I taught at the start of September my first class in the DODC. Kind of the asynchronous over Zoom model. Similar to this. And my very first class, I'm in my office just like this, and we have multiple screens, so I'm all plugged in, and I'm sharing my screen. At least I think I am. And here I am, 20, 30 minutes in, and I realize nobody can see my slides because they're up on a different screen and I had the wrong one shared. So, I'm recording this and everything. So went as well as you would expect in your very first, class in this method. So I wanted to make sure you all can see what I'm looking at. But yeah, my name is Joe Yestrepsky. Thank you, Steve, for the introduction. This is my second year at BG as an assistant professor. First year teaching in the DODC program. So taught that intro to research methods. Really had a great time. A little bit about myself. I'm a second career academic. Spent the first 10, 15 years of my career as a small business owner in the energy consulting realm. And kind of, I got an MBA from Wayne State during that. Actually was focused more on finance at the time. Background was in engineering before that. And, kind of halfway through was thinking it was time to do something different and applied to the organizational behavior PhD program at Wayne State almost on a whim. Only PhD program I applied to. Kind of went through the process, got in, and naively, look back now at how little I knew about research and everything else. But luckily, found out that I really enjoyed it. Spent 5 years there, all through COVID. from teaching in person to being sent home for classes, teaching remotely, all those changes at the same time. Had my first child. My wife was getting her master's. So this kind of remote work and the changes and how we adapt to it was very real for me personally. More recently, learning about this OD field, my background is organizational behavior, but I think the fit is really well because although I'm very focused on kind of the employee psychological experiences, where my research lies is really connecting the organization to employees. I think, my background being more of the engineering, finance, business owner, I think organization first a lot of times, and now my training is in more of that, employee experience, psychology side of things. So I typically look at the connection between these big organizational decisions, initiatives, actions, in this case, remote work, return to the office, but I also look at like workplace wellness initiatives, work-life balance initiatives, sustainability initiatives with my background in energy, and how those impact the employees, how the employees understand those, how they kind of discern their organization's motives behind them, and then how that impacts the employees. So I didn't really know it at the time until I've gotten more involved with the DODC program of how much my research fits with what you all do as practitioners and scholars. So with that, I hope this talk is really interesting. I do want this to be a conversation. I'm going to throw a decent amount of research, mine and others, about this remote work topic out at you. And always with research like that, we're talking across employees on average, like what are the big themes? But I do think with this topic, it is so idiosyncratic. I talk to my friends who are in a similar life situation to me, mid-career, young kids, going through this same process. And I'll have one friend who can't wait to be back in the office or wanted to get back as soon as he could. And one friend that's like, if they send me back, I quit. So even though we're all in the same cohort, the reactions to it is completely different. So we're going to talk a lot about some of the big trends, but I definitely want to hear your all experiences too, because it is so unique to the individual. And I think that's where some of the best ideas, and that's where I'm excited to learn from you all and hear your experiences and see what that kind of triggers with myself. Everybody saw my slide? Go ahead. We're off and running. We're good. All right. So what we're going to do, we're just going to kind of go back in time a bit, talk about, and just a reminder about how this all unfolded. This is research that I started as a PhD student with some of the faculty at Wayne State. Like we started looking at this in the middle of COVID and we were sent home. And then as research takes so long, all of a sudden it became a, working from home question. And then it was a return to office question. And now it's a hybrid question. And I feel like this was the top topic kind of in business for so long until AI this last year kind of sucked up all the oxygen. But I think we still very much are grappling with, what's the best thing for organizations to do. So quick little roadmap of where we've been to where we are, kind of what are some of the big research takeaways of whether it's on productivity or employee experience on this return to office, remote work questions. Going to take some time to hear your experiences and thoughts with working from home or what your companies did or the return to office, phenomenon, the rollout from COVID, the whole thing. And then end with talking about my research that I'm here to share with you that really focuses on that employee experience side of things. So that's the big picture here. And, I'm looking forward to sharing it all. So pre-COVID, about half of work had to be done in person. Me and Teo were talking, we have a bunch of healthcare in our family. So certain people this doesn't apply to. And that was about half of the occupations here in the States. So your frontline, your retail, kind of what you would expect. But about half of occupations can be completed at home, your knowledge workers. But it may be lost sight of now that prior to COVID, only about 7% of the US workforce was primarily at home. And 75% had never experienced this. So for very much the majority of the population, this was a new experience, something that they went through for the first time. And it was really new to organizations definitely new to managers. It was a kind of trial and error. So obviously COVID happens and we start sending workers home. You know, the first big reaction, I think, as far as kind of the news perspective of this, and a lot of this is from the big tech companies that get so much of that coverage, was, hey, working from home's awesome. Our employees are doing great. We're going to work from home forever. And this was what you were hearing a lot out of these big companies. And over the years went on, I think that was, 2002-ish, kind of the theme, it was kind of that whoops, never mind. Disney sending everybody back in the office. Elon Musk, very pro, get back in the office. Amazon's been in the news a lot the last couple of years, and the stuff, they're suggesting, hey, we need to be back 3, 4, 5 days a week in the office in person. Okay, I got friends and family that are at Google out of Chicago, same thing. They've really tightened up their work from home practices. One I like, I'm over in Metro Detroit, been here my whole life, so tons of family and family auto related. Kind of anecdotally watching GM's plan over the years and hearing from my friends. So you can see, 2023, they were kind of already pushing for return to office and delayed that. And then this middle one here in December 2023, it was like a Friday night, exactly what they tell companies probably not to do, the news dump. But Friday night, all the employees get a email, hey, we're coming back in the new year in person. And it was just, I remember vividly my buddies, a couple of GM buddies texting about it. Can you believe this? And the pushback was terrible on all the intra, message boards and everything, and got some general coverage as well. GM, hey, we rolled that out wrong. And again, they kind of apologized and pushed it back. Now, all that being said, I know GM is, I think, 3 days a week in person now. So they eventually got there, but not without a lot of employee backlash, employee resistance, and some bumps along the road. And all in all, about half the companies that at one point were like those tech companies I showed that said, hey, we're going to work from home forever, eventually reneged on that and moved towards, hey, we need to have it in person, in office presence. Now, most of that now is trending more towards that hybrid model, 3-4 days a week. You are seeing some pushing towards that 5 day a week. But I think broadly, the phenomenon that we're looking at now is, why is there this employee resistance and backlash to being brought back into the office? And why are organizations really pushing against that? So organizations want their employees back in the office after working from home during COVID. Here we have, as of 2 years ago, this was a survey. About 70% of employees said that if you bring me back in the office, I look for a new job. That was up to 80% in Gen Z. Now, I actually find the second part pretty interesting about Gen Z, talking about how this is more idiosyncratic than maybe the research suggests, is when I straw poll my undergrads, who granted haven't worked yet, very much their opinion is I want to be in person. Probably of a 3-to-1 opposite direction, where they want to be in the office. You hear much less talk about flexibility, work-life balance. I want a remote job. Now, maybe that changes once you start at a company. So maybe that's what's different about this stat, is that these Gen Z workers were already in organizations. But again, I think it speaks to that idiosyncratic nature here, that we can have these big data sets or these big surveys, get a feel for the larger trend. But when you really start talking to people, these little nuances come out. But overall, employees have been resistant to return to office. 70%, 80% say they don't want it. They'll quit jobs and they're not happy about it. And really, this forced return to office movement is exasperating a lot of the kind of recent trends in employment that's taking up, that employers and individuals are concerned about, and kind of the OD perspective, the performance and the health of organizations and their employees. So the return to the office mandates, actually, this JP Morgan one is probably one of the most recent examples of this. This is from summer. there was a leaked kind of internal memo from JP Morgan about how like the return to office movement was going. And it was what you would expect. Employees hated it. It was hitting morale, increasing burnout, and just not being effective as they kind of forced this return to office mandate. But bigger than that, it's kind of exaggerating those concerns we have about burnout, those concerns we have about quiet quitting or resenteeism, essentially employees being disengaged. Hey, I'm not going to quit my job, but I'm going to do the bare minimum I can so that I don't get fired and I can coast by. I'm just not here to go above and beyond in any way. So whether that's because they resent their organization or they're upset being back in the office, a mixture of both. But this mandated return to work is kind of emphasizing all these trends we've seen post-COVID with the workforce. So it brings to the question of why are companies doing this? If most said, hey, you can work from home, and then reneged on that, and the backlash from employees is so strong and against this return to office, why are companies kind of digging their heels in and doing this? So there's a few things. One is, your CEOs, your C-suite, your managers, executives tend to be more anti-remote work. And I think it's because they're from a generation in their own experiences, they rise through the ranks working in person. We're all creatures of our own experiences. And a lot of them did not work from home as they moved up through their career. So they believe in a lot of the, whether it's monitoring, line of sight, I have to see my employees doing their job, teamwork, innovation, these topics that have been culture, that have been such a big deal kind of these last 20 years about how to build organizations and our culture. And, let's go to teamwork-based work, innovation, creativity. A lot of that is thought to be done better in person. And when I think of this story, I can't help but think of my dad. My dad is retired now, but spent a career working at the big utility companies, typical business career, moved up to the director level, managing groups of people. And no matter how many times we have these talks and I tell him about my research or what, where the conversation is or a new study that came out, he just can't get around the fact of, how do you really know your employees are doing their work if they're at home? If they're behind that screen and you can't see them, how do you know they're not playing on their phone or just doing the bare minimum? And no matter what story or stat I tell them, I can't get him to change his mind about that. And I think that's pretty consistent with the generation that is running a lot of these companies. They had their success in person, and they think that's the best way to do work. This third point's interesting. There also appears to be a conceptual difference about kind of the meaning of productivity from employees and managers from in-person to at-home work. And what that is employees, when they kind of do their productivity math in their head, include their time saved on their commute and their time saved getting ready, which is about 70 minutes a day. They average commutes 30 minutes each way, and on average, it's been found that employees spend about 10 extra minutes getting ready if they're going into person. So a little extra time shaving or makeup or whatever. So about that 70 minutes, when you ask an employee, are you more productive at home or in the office? They include that time saved in their equation. Managers tend to not. They think about it with time spent in the office and work from that perspective. So this is from an HBR article, this image on my right. And you can see the red is managers, the left is employees. And when asked about the employees' productivities, employees, when they're talking about themselves, they skew to the right here, which is the plus productivity side of things. They're more productive in person or at home. Managers skew to the left. So you can see that pretty clear, meaning that they think their employees are 10, 20, 15% less productive when they work from home. So there's this conceptual difference about what productivity or how we calculate it between employees and managers. So that's interesting. The background's interesting. And, we kind of get to this spot where employees want one thing, companies think they're right and expecting the other. Where do we go from there? So that's kind of the roadmap. And then we're going to get into the research next. But I'd love to take a minute, and for those that want to share or can share, jump on in and tell me what you think. What was your experience? What did your companies do? What did you do? Are you more productive in home or otherwise? Yeah, Jillian, that's great. Lead us off, so just people can shout it out.
Yeah, well, it's easier than typing. I was typing it because as you were saying that about just what they're used to and the assumption of, you have to work in the office rather than at home, it made me think of the comparison we see sometimes between face-to-face and online education, where the one is assumed to be quality and students are learning and all these amazing things are happening, but how do you know they're not on their phone in the 500-person lecture too, And
Oh, they are.
right, so that was one quality or one comparison that just sprang to mind that I thought was kind of interesting to me, at least, having
Absolutely.
experienced
Yeah,
it.
I think anytime, I'm sorry, I'm catching up on the chat too while we go. Anytime you challenge an established norm, and that's, I was listening to some OD and C material this morning to kind of prompt myself. And that was the thing. They were saying a lot of what we know about change is actually we know studying resistance to change, and I think that was one of the quotes I heard. And it makes sense. Anytime you challenge or move away from something so drastically, there's going to be an assumption that the old way was the right way. Because why wouldn't it have been if that's what we did for the last 100 years? So I think that fits in the education example is great. Anybody else want to jump in? Sierra?
Hi. Okay, so I just love this conversation. I think what would be I have found to be interesting is in jobs where I had more options and choice. For one of my first roles out of my master's program, I started remote just because the building was under renovation. There were options to work remotely or to work in a different building, and so it still provided a collaborative space. What was nice is I had the ability to co-create that type of experience and then work with my peers. What I find about remote work is kind of the relationship with desirability, and I think just in general workplace satisfiers. So for example, for me now, if I were to have a lower paying job with more choice about how I show up to that job, I would enjoy that. I think if I was had a job that paid significantly more, I don't think I need as many choices because my satisfaction is supplemented in another way. Just a thought.
Yeah, I love it. First off, you use like co-creating and choice. When we get to my research, a lot of it falls on autonomy, which I think both fit that term. So awesome, great lead in. And I agree with your second point. And I think that's where this conversation heads in the future, especially if we are seeing a tightening labor market and these other big influences when it comes to employment, whether it's a rising unemployment rate or just fewer net new jobs. I think you'll see it is more of we pay for people to be in person. Like, I think that's how, if employers are going to get this leverage back, because if you remember after COVID, we had this huge kind of spike in unemployment. Everybody was sent home. We were paying people not to work. And then the labor market got crazy tight. And there was all this competition for new employees. And the balance of power kind of swung towards the individual. If it is swinging back the other way, what I think ultimately, where this could go is that whether it's directly linked to salary or just the position itself is explicitly saying you're going to be back in person. Because that was an idea too of where this would go is, companies would pay more for jobs in person. So hey, if you want to work from home, great, but your salary is X instead of Y. But now if companies have more of the leverage, is it just this is a fully in-person position? Is that where this goes? But I think you touched on 2 points that I absolutely agree with. Is that Lynn?
This is Rihanna. Yeah, sorry. Um, yeah, for me in the workplace, because I already had in a service delivery and a large field team of fairly highly paid experts, we were already in a mode in the field of managing remotely. So you learn to manage through trust and, is the output there, are the services being delivered? So going remote for the field team um, was basically a non-issue. It's mostly the back office or because from the government organization and the policy people and finance that were typically in the office. So now the organization is on the 3 days a week, and there was a lot of backlash even for that. Sadly, I find that it is the people in the lowest paid positions that are most negatively affected. So more the administrative cog, the AS level, policy groups, etc. Because going to work in the office, there's the wardrobe costs. When you look at women, you can't necessarily wear the same suit every day and just change the shirt. So there is financial investment in a wardrobe, especially if you want to look professional. And there's also the cost of travel, especially for the young professionals that may live in suburbs to save money because downtown is just too expensive to get to their. And then there's the cost of travel. So it's those people in the lower paid positions that now have to go back to the office that tend to be more negatively affected. And that's where I think a lot of the pushback is. It's like, why? We delivered 4 times our output when we were remote. So really, we could probably do our regular output remote now that we're out of the COVID experience. So that's what we've been seeing.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you touched on 2 or 3 things that are in the slide deck. Really interesting how you mentioned kind of trust-based. I have a slide coming up of like a side-by-side of kind of the work experience from in person to at home, and that's really what it is. When you switch to at home work, a lot of that does become trust-based. So that's 100% my opinion on that as well. And there's a stat about kind of it's in a few slides. I can't recall if it's a productivity stat or more of a employee experience stat, but that was the biggest benefits for at home. I think it was hybrid work in that case, work like you said, the non-managers, female employees, and those with long commutes. So everything you're saying, I think plays out in the data about who some of the benefits are of this.
Yeah, and the one last point that I would add to that is I do value bringing people in person, but have it with purpose, with intent, where you're not bringing people in an office just to do the work they would normally be doing from home, but to, this is where we're trying to solve a problem together. This is where we're going to build an activity together, again, to support that culture, support those connections and that human connection that is definitely needed in order to be productive when you're remote.
100%. Totally agree. And one more opinion. Anybody else have something while I catch up on the chat for a sec?
I can add, in really
Please.
adding to what Lynn said. So I worked for IBM till recently, till earlier this year. Most global companies, during COVID, but even before that, because they have such a dispersed workforce, basically co-create and do everything virtually, gotten very good at using virtual murals and everything. There is, though, a strain on the building relationships and pieces like that. So for pieces like that, I definitely think that organizations need to have some of the in-person, because it's so much easier to do that. But, I've worked on the external consulting side for IBM as well as in the internal consulting. And, in external consulting, when you're going to clients, you're building relationships that way. It's important. But a lot of the work you do can also be done remotely. I think one of the, big things in RTO and why there's so much pushback sometimes is because we have so many generations in the workforce. A lot of us have been very successful working for many years in a hybrid environment. We've worked with our global colleagues all times of days, and been very, very productive to deliver, outcomes for our clients. And similarly, we've kind of worked in person to build the relationships. And when a lot of these RTO mandates were put out, it was not clear what is the focus of the RTO. And therefore, it's made, it's gotten sort of a backlash because I have a young adult who's just, started in the workforce. And I think for her, it's really beneficial to be in the office, and get the mentoring and the collaboration, but flexibility. She doesn't have to go 3 days a week. And, different stages of your life, you need flexibility to look after kids, look after parents. And so that's the part that sort of gets lost with the mandates and the way they're rolled out. I think depending on obviously the role in the organization, some roles don't give themselves, the like you have to go, and if you're working at Dunkin' Donuts, you have to be in the office. You don't get that flexibility. But a lot of our roles have changed where you do have that flexibility. So that's just what I want. It's a complex topic, and I think right now we're in a stage where employers may be in a power equation, but that could flip again at some point. And this is really going to see a whole different cycle where they're going to start again losing employees who are dissatisfied, to be honest with you.
You're absolutely right. And I saw your comment too about Adam Grant's research on the topic. And I agree. And actually, that's where we're going next is some of his podcasts or everything. He's pulled in Nick Bloom from Stanford, who does a lot of this work. I'm going to cite that. And there are some really cool insights. So that was a perfect lead in with that comment. And I appreciate the convo. Oops, lost my, all right. So where did sorry, 1 second. I lost the screen share with all of you in it.
We still see it. Your slides.
Okay. I lost all the faces I lost. So
No, I can see, we can see does
Okay.
WFH. What is your experiences? Does, state of the research.
All right. So, yep. Got it. Sorry. So next question. Do we think that work from home hurts productivity? So you can throw a yes or no, or what's more productive, work from home, work from office, hybrid. Throw it into the chat, and we can we can see where what you all think, and then we're gonna get into what the research says. It depends. It depends. Yes, the social psychologist answer. It always depends. It does. That's pretty good. Remote work, more productive. Work from home. Did anybody say full on work from office? No difference. Anybody think work from office? Like would anybody put their money on that?
Well, if you work for a car wash or Chipotle or food service, whatever, it makes sense. It's context. It's always context. The consultant answer, it depends.
There you go.
Totally agree. I mean, certain roles have to be customer facing, and you don't have that flexibility.
I agree.
And depends on productivity as well, what you mean. Productivity is it putting out what is expected in a normal day. A lot of people can do their normal day work in 2/3 of the time when they're at home because they can do it with fewer disruptions. But if you're talking about productivity going over and above and doing more, even that would require a full day, 8 hours, and you'd still get more done, in my view, depending again on the type of work and all that, without the disruptions of the office. So it just, your ebb and flow of productivity will vary through the week.
Yes, I agree. I'm sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty trying to bounce between seeing everybody's face and all right. I'm just gonna have to guess. All right, so the state of the research, where are we at with that? So I appreciate the guesses. And I'm sorry, give me a second. For some reason, it is really struggling with me. All right, do I still have everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
We're all here.
Yeah, Teo, why is it now I'm only seeing my presenter view? I lost everybody's face.
I'm not sure. You've switched something to where your view now, we can still see your slides, but I have your actual video inset on it.
Which is kind of cool.
Which is kind of cool. So whatever Zoom setting you found there, it works for us.
Yeah.
If you can't see the rest of us, I'm not sure.
Go with it, man. We'll tell you when we're dissatisfied.
But now I can't see everybody's faces, so now I'm talking to my computer.
You will soon.
Okay. Well, it might get a little I don't know, a little different, but we're gonna roll with it. So we talked about it, and I saw that someone in the chat said that they were surprised by this, but 70 minutes a day to and from work, with about 10 minutes of that being kind of the extra getting ready time. Hybrid workers typically actually work less during their work from home days, but they make up for it on nights and weekends. So again, kind of at this productivity question, that's where we're starting off now. Much more likely to send emails and work, nights and weekends though. So I think the calculation that we do in our head when we work hybrid is that time is mine. If I don't get to it during the day, I'm more likely to make it up at nights and weekends. So diving into some of the key research that's been done in this field. So this is research by others, kind of the top studies. So we mentioned like Nicholas Bloom, he's an economist at Stanford. Tons of resources, has done some really cool experiments in this area. So kind of the gold standard for getting at causality with some randomized controlled trials. So back before COVID, kind of the landmark study in this was a 2013 study he did with randomly sending individuals from a call center in China, either to have them continue to work full-time in the office or work from home for 4 days out of the week. They did this for 9 months and then followed their productivity going out the following years. And the 4-day-a-week hybrid group was 13% more productive based on the call center metrics, and 9% of that 13% was actually from working more minutes per shift. So less distractions, which I think I saw come up in the chat. So kind of right there, the first feather in the hat of hybrid work. More recently, this is at kind of the kickoff of the pandemic and sending everybody home. Again, Nicholas Bloom and colleagues found that during the first shift to full remote work, those fully remote were 8 to 19% less productive. And that was output for whatever it was in this case per hours worked, with it showing that there was kind of a slow in communication and less collaboration across workers. And that findings has been replicated elsewhere. I know Microsoft did a big report of their employees, and they saw that remote workers tended to I think send fewer emails and to a smaller social network of people that they were reaching out to. So less collaboration from the group that was at home. So kind of here, I think it's important to note too that this is during the early stages of the pandemic. So there was probably some productivity losses as we all switched to this for the first time. The Zoom fatigue, rolling out these new technologies. How do we manage in this environment? So I think there's a little bit of nuance here, but this study kind of swings the other way, where fully remote was less productive than in person. Another study from a different group of authors from NIBR. Here it was data center workers in India, fully remote. They were randomly assigned to work from home. Those that were randomly assigned were 18% less productive. So again, in the fully remote versus fully in-person conversation, in-person was more productive. So similar to the last study by Bloom and colleagues, same findings here. Most recently, this is Bloom and colleagues in, this was published in Nature 2023, so fairly recent. Randomized controlled trial again, 1,600 workers randomly sent either to continue in person or move hybrid for 2 days a week. What this study found, there was no difference in performance. So again, from the productivity conversation that we've been just having, productivity during that period and for the next 2 years was the same. So no loss of productivity with the hybrid environment, no difference in performance. But what you saw was some of the employee metrics and kind of the employee experience side of things. Improved job satisfaction for those that went to hybrid, less burnout, and fewer quits. And again, similar to the comment we had in the conversation, this was strongest, those not quitting with non-managers, female employees, and those with the longest commutes. And interesting, the managers in this experiment that were sent to work hybrid 2 days a week actually changed their views on productivity from their views of productivity while working hybrid or working from home from slightly negative to slightly positive. So similar to that, to the talk about, why are managers and companies resistant to this, and having the fact that a lot of the executives and managers hadn't experienced it themselves. As a lot of the behavioral work shows, once you are exposed to something, you're more likely to have a favorable opinion of that or change your opinion. And that's what we saw here, that the managers that were in this actually saw how hybrid could be a positive productivity boon. So across the productivity research, I'm sorry, I gotta take a second and figure out why I can't see your faces.
There should be a button at the top that says view, and that should give you options.
See, right now I was just, I was stuck in like presentation mode.
You might have a little, I don't know, icon with like squares on the top. If you click on that, you can go into most likely gallery view. Right, top corner.
Yeah, right. All right. Okay, I think we're good now. Everybody see my slides?
Yeah, but you got the slide and the slides to the side in the notes. You need to put in presentation mode.
I guess you could do display settings up top and make it duplicate. Oh gosh, it's grayed out.
Yeah. I apologize for this. I took it off my. We lose the slides now.
Yes, we did.
All we see is your lovely face.
Which also works.
Yeah, we might have to go there.
Now we're seeing your regular PowerPoint view. There you go.
Okay, I think I got it. Now, as long as it lets me. Okay, great. I do apologize. Okay, so the productivity talk, it seems like hybrid is as productive, if not more. some mixed findings when we're looking at fully in-person versus fully remote from the productivity side of things. So what about from the employee side of things, which is kind of where the switch to my research lies. So this is a recent meta-analysis, so study of studies, done by Ravi and colleagues. So if you see that second name, Jay Panapali, he's the first author on the paper I'm going to share with you. He is a faculty member at Wayne State, came in my second year of the Ph.D. program, and his advisor is Ravi, who I always mess up his last names, but I've met him enough times where I can call him Ravi. Dr. Jandarn. But he's at FIU down in Florida and one of the leading scholars on remote work. So they published this meta-analysis in a great journal, 105 studies covering 45,000 employees. And they look at a variable called remote work intensity, so essentially how many hours spent working remotely. And across all these studies, across all these employees, on average, remote work has a small but positive effect on job satisfaction, commitment, less turnover, and supervisor rated performance. So in general, as across this huge sample, as employees worked more at home, performance didn't improve, and there was no negative effect found across several other variables. So positive feather to the remote work group here. They also looked at work from home versus work from office as a 1-0, just one or the other, so not remote work intensity. They saw that work from home had a positive relationship with performance and satisfaction, and then no key negative relationships, whether that's stress or even things you might expect, like relationship with your coworkers. There was not a negative effect to that. So, kind of in line with some of the work we saw from the productivity research, from kind of the economist side, the employee experience side seems to favor that hybrid or even work from home approach. And what this meta-analysis found, and it touches on, I think, the experiences of the remote worker, is what they call the dual pathway model. There is this push-pull going on. And to the point about autonomy that Sierra mentioned with, I have this choice or I get to co-create, that's kind of the big positive psychological impact on these employees. When you work more from home, or you get to work from home instead of in the office, you get more choice. You get to choose what you wear that day. Maybe there's less worries about, I got to wear a suit or something along those lines. Where do I want to work? Do I want to work on the couch? Do I want to work in my office? Do I want to go grab a Starbucks? Can I work in the evening? I don't have to start maybe right at 9 a.m. anymore. I can run out and go to the gym, and have more autonomy over my workday. So that in general is the big positive psychological driver of this experience. But there is this push-pull, which is why some employees often, may find that remote work's not right for them, and that's with this perception of isolation. You're not around your coworkers if that's something that's important to you and fostering that relationship. You may miss out on mentoring and developmental ideas. It may be more challenging to get feedback from your boss. Okay, that line of sight that you think, hey, I need to be seen so I can get that next promotion. All those are less in the remote work environment. So this is that push-pull. There's clearly a positive driver and a negative as well. And which one kind of wins the day depends on the individual. So big takeaways here, there was no clear downside to increasing that remote work intensity because in across these studies, across all these employees, that increase in isolation that is found is either offset or more than offset by that increase in autonomy. So that was the main finding from this meta-analysis that kind of brings us to the employee experience here. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes, a little time check, talking about my research. And you'll see here it's with Dr. Panapali at Wayne State, who was on that meta-analysis, and also Dr. Teklev, who is much more the expert in the, you'll see this term here, psychological contract, and this is really the fancy word for the employee experience and that employment relationship from the employee's perspective. So we talked about this in our lead-in. I'll slide through. So the big question we had is bringing us to why are employees resistant to this return to office mandate, especially within the context of it's often the work arrangement that employees themselves signed up for. If you were with the same employer 6-7 years ago, you likely started in a role where you were expected to be in person full time. So what changed after? I think we know what changed, but what, that being sent home, that COVID experience, that work from home experience has now changed the view of so many employees that I no longer want to be back in the office, even though that's what I signed up for 5 years ago. So what explains this backlash to return to office mandates and working from the office? So the frame we look at here is this psychological contract. And typically, if you're not in the organizational behavior field, this is a new concept. It's really a fancy word for the employment relationship. As employees, we have economic exchanges with our employer. Those are often written. I'm going to work this many hours on these tasks, and then you're going to pay me X and give me these benefits. We also have this psychological contract, this kind of contract held in our minds about our employers of what we feel that our employers is obligated to give us. So that may be developmental opportunities, or care about me as a person, my work-life balance, have the same social mission. And that's really what we're talking about here, is this view from the employee's perspective of my organization held up its side of the bargain and fulfilled its obligation to me. And in the same way that a contract can be breached or fulfilled, this psychological contract that we hold in our minds can be kind of your employer gave you what was obligated to, you feel like they breached that. So it's this idea of obligations between what the employee expected of their organization. And what we know about these psychological contracts and this employment relationship, and this has been being researched now since back in the 80s, is that they're heavily influenced by what our organization tells us. So HR policies, communications with your managers, what other employees, treatment they got, what you've seen. It's also influenced by social norms as these kind of develop and change over the years. So as the kind of employment experience changes and the expectation of what's socially expected, these psychological agreements we have in our mind change too. So certainly that COVID disruption acted as one of those kind of key shifts in the way employees view work. And I think that happened in a lot of ways, not just the work arrangement practice, but how we expect our employers to care about our mental health, our physical health, our work-life balance. It's all kind of in this shock that happened when you sent all these workers home for a prolonged period of time. We know from this remote work literature, and I touched on this already, there's these two key psychological experiences that are being pushed and pulled. That perception of autonomy, I need to make my own decisions, and that feeling of isolation, I'm out of sight, out of mind. And depending on the individual, who wins in this or what wins in this push-pull is going to impact whether you have a more negative or a more positive experience. I mentioned this a bit when we were just talking as a group, but you can really see here on the left side the traditional work arrangement and how things were expected of the employer versus the employee. I expected my employer to offer me a workspace and a safe work environment with feedback and support and professional development. And I was expected to commute to the office Monday through Friday at a set work schedule, follow a dress code, and report on my goals. And a lot of that here under these remote work arrangements shifted to exactly what was said, that trust-based relationship here. When you don't have that line of sight or that in-person experience, a lot of this of where you're working, when you're working, how much work you're getting done, your productivity becomes more trust-based than it was when we were all in person. So we build on this dual pathway model from this meta-analysis, where being post COVID, being sent back to the office, so post-pandemic work from office, would be related to a lower perception of autonomy. I feel like I'm losing this valued resource that I had during COVID, during working from home. However, going in there, I'm going to feel less isolated. So that push-pull again. And depending on what wins out, this either loss of autonomy or this increased social support, this less isolation is gonna lead to me feeling like this psychological contract, this obligation with my employer was not met, breach of the psychological contract. And I went through these in my little discussion. I know we're short on time, so I'm speeding up a bit. So with that, what we added on to this is also this connection with these downstream outcomes that are so important to organizations right now with the quiet quitting and the Resentium and the focus on employee health. So depending on if you feel like you lost autonomy or that you are less isolated will determine if you feel like your organization breached your psychological contract or did not meet that obligation that you had of them. With that, we add this perspective of, am I working my preferred amount of remote work? So above and beyond whether you're being sent back to the office, is there congruence between how much I want to be working remote and how much I actually am? And that's going to also add to explain this, whether or not I feel like the organization breached their obligation to me, met their obligation, or breached this contract. So we looked at this across 2 studies. Now, I wish I had the resources and can go back in time where I could randomly assign people to be sent home during the pandemic and then bring them back to the office, but that isn't necessarily feasible. So the first thing we did was a 2x3 design of a scenario-based vignette where individuals read a scenario about the change in their work arrangement based during COVID and then responded as if they were that employee. And then we went and replicated that with a field study of actual organizations or actual employees in organizations. So what this vignette looked like is during COVID, they would get one of these scenarios matched. So either we told all employees that prior to COVID, they worked in the office, as was typically the norm. And then during COVID, you were either sent to work from home or you were told to stay in the office with some health protocols in place. And then after COVID, you were either allowed to continue working from home, you were allowed to work hybrid, or you had to return to the office. And this created this during COVID, post-COVID scenario, 2x3 matrix. So we had 6 scenarios, each with about 60 individuals acting in the role of employees in there. And with that, we're able to test the differences between these combinations of work arrangements. And then we replicated that in a field study with employees who actually fit these combinations. So using some tricks with pre-screeners on Prolific, we were able to say, okay, this employee worked in person before COVID, was sent home during COVID, and now works hybrid, and replicate these 6 conditions to retest our experimental vignette. So we had about 400 individuals do the online vignette and a different 222 in our second study. So these are separate individuals recruited from online to test this full research model. And we can always come back and if you have any individual questions. For the few of you I see that were in my methods course that are working towards their dissertations and learning this, this is how this looked behind the scenes. So we dummy code these 6 conditions so you can test similar to you would if someone was in an intervention or not in an intervention. You can test the power of that variable and whether or not they were in that group, along with these other measures that we collected via scales. And I can see it when I'm looking at it now. I see Wasim there nodding his head. So we went through a lot of this. So these are, the psychological constructs that we captured. This PCB is psychological contract breach. So what we found to go through it quickly, is broadly, we found support for our model across both studies. Working from the office post-pandemic, being that return to office sent back in, you experience less autonomy, also less isolation, but that relationship with autonomy is stronger. And similar to what was found in the meta-analysis, that relationship in both the vignette and the in-person overrided the I'm less isolated, but this loss of autonomy is what's the strongest psychological factor, leading to this belief that my organization breached their obligation to me. They did not offer me what I believe I'm owed. And in this case, that is autonomy. The autonomy that I got used to working remotely, that you are now taking away from me and I'm getting less of, means you're not living up to your side of the bargain, fulfilling your obligation. And with that, it leads to, measured a couple weeks later, unless these people were less satisfied with their jobs, had a bigger intention to not stay at the organization long term, and were more burnt out. Fancy way to look at this, but this measures that congruence between how much work, remote work I'm doing versus how much remote work I want to do. And this little line across the red says that when you have congruence there, and these people are working as much remotely as they want, that also leads to fulfillment of the agreement. Or when there is discongruence, it's not congruent, and I'm working too much remotely or not enough, on either side of that equation, I feel more that my organization did not fulfill that obligation to me, and therefore leading to being more dissatisfied with your job, more burnt out. So that here you can see with this congruence circle at the top has additional explanatory power above and beyond whether I'm being sent back to the office or not. So when you do these between group comparisons, everything I just said was return to office versus both hybrid and work from home. You can also do with other comparisons like hybrid versus fully work from home, hybrid versus fully in office. So we do all these in the paper, and a few key takeaways is across in the vignette study, it was as you would think. There was the most autonomy working from home, then hybrid, then working from the office. And across both studies, autonomy was the stronger predictor over isolation. So when you have this push-pull of autonomy versus being with your coworkers, the autonomy is what winning out, both in the vignettes scenario as well as with the actual employees in their jobs. One interesting thing in study 2, which was the actual field experiment with employees doing their work and answering their questions about themselves. When you look at hybrid versus work from home, in that scenario, the improvement in isolation over working fully from home when you work hybrid was non-significant. So heading back just 2 days a week in the office versus being fully remote, you didn't see that bump in less isolation that you expected, but you did see the bump in I'm feeling like I have less autonomy. So that was an interesting finding where we didn't see the expected improvement from 2 days a week. So could you consider that maybe only 2 days a week in person wasn't enough to experience that that increased social relationship, given how much autonomy is being lost? So an interesting finding when we really dug into the data there. So wrapping up the big things, this element of autonomy that is so key to the remote work experience has really now became viewed as an obligation from our employers. Going and being sent home for that experience is now something that employees feel their organizations are obligated to be offering them. And if they don't, if you're not working as much remotely as you want, or if you're forced back like in a mandate, you're going to believe that your organization is not fulfilling their end of the bargain, leading to these well-known downstream outcomes. Isolation is still important, but consistently does not override that loss of autonomy that is happening here. And if, relative to work from home versus hybrid, we did see that middle ground effect, work from home versus work from office. We did see that middle ground effect from hybrid working out. So what can organizations do? That's my last slide. While both are important, autonomy does seem to have more explanatory power and more effect than isolation. But really, and this goes to some of the Adam Grant research here, one, survey your employees, see what they want, then try something out and evaluate. Typically, 3 in person, 2 days work from home has seemed to be a good place to start. But it brings up this debate between choice and coordination. Which 2 days do people work from home? Which days are we in the office? That might fit people's different schedules differently. How do you coordinate your teams within that? So you have to, think about these types of elements. Adam Grant uses a good example of thinking about, is your work design, is it a independent, relay, or team sport? If it's a team sport with everybody kind of co-working together, passing the ball, different challenges with coordination versus a relay sport where, kind of work goes from one to the other versus a more independent sport like gymnastics. So thinking about your work design like that, I think has some practical reasons for why that's effective. And ultimately, in person, do what needs to be done in person. Don't send people back just to do work they could be doing at home where they're losing that sense of autonomy just for the sake of being back in the office. So that's it for my side of the research. I'd love to hear your opinions and thoughts on it, and then we can get into some of these DODC questions.
Yeah, we got just a minute for maybe a quick response or two.
Sure.
The the one adage that I like to use in collaborative change processes that you should only do together what you can only do when you're together.
Yep.
And that's a really important litmus test.
I agree. I've heard you say that in meetings, and I agree with it.
Yeah. Anybody have any closing question or a comment they want to make before we shift gears here?
Anything on the rhythm of connecting face-to-face versus in person? My thoughts on that are shaped by Christina Gibson's research on this years ago, which talking about rhythm of connecting and then working remotely.
I haven't heard of that line of research or thought about it. I'd love to hear your opinion quickly on it, just so I can have a place to go and see how it affects my research.
Sure. This research that came out probably 7 or 8 years ago, looking at co-working, co-located work versus distance-oriented work. She was using a different terminology back then, but one of the key findings I just found was great. Was the relational, paying attention to the relational component of teamwork is really important, and that a kind of a consistent finding is that taking the time at the beginning of a team organization to do relational work in person if possible sort of sets the stage for highly effective remote work. And then there's there should be some sort of rhythm of working face to face, and then that sets the stage for doing remote work. So and that's gonna, I think, vary by context. I was just curious if you found anything that would support those findings from quite a few years ago now.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to get into it. It was not an element of what we looked at, but it's definitely something I'm going to give some thought to going forward. I appreciate that.
Great. Well, let's shift gears. So,
sure.
As you said, you're new kind of to the field of ODC from the perspective of bringing organizational behavior, social behavioral sciences. And when you look at the field itself, it's a big part of OB in one sense. And yet it's not given as much attention. For many of you out there, organizational behavior takes sociology and psychology and anthropology, applies it to people, teams, and organizations, and to understand the behavior of people in those organizations. in that body of literature is the field of OD. It's there. It gets a little bit of a cursory attention over the years, and where OB tends to really dig into the science behind behavior in organizations. So you're new to it, but you're not, and you also have worked in the field professionally and so forth. And psychological contracts are a huge part of the ODC, how we create those contracts. And so I think you have a lot to bring to how we think about it. And I'm really curious about your perspective as you bring and continue to translate OB into that. So the first question really gets at like defining the field and your perspective on that. And so if you could you just how do you describe right now? How someone says, what is ODC? How do you define and describe it today? And maybe how has it shifted just in the short period of time that you've gotten to kind of really dive more into it?
Yeah. I think of it as, how are we going to transform organizations, typically through interventions, looking at performance and people, efficiency and health, both of those elements. So when I think about it as how can we change and develop these organizations to reflect with the physical and mental health of our employees. So having the OD perspective, I tend to focus on that employee outcome side of things and really, what's their experience going to be. So how can we influence that through these organizational interventions?
Yeah. And when you think about ODC, and other disciplines that are like HR or IO Psych or even project management or talent development, how do you differentiate it from these other professions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I would take probably more of this action research perspective that I am, learned about and teaching now about being this kind of change agent within your organization, and it being this cyclical process of, how can I define a problem, figure out a solution, see what works, reiterate, and go through that, versus maybe more of the third party approach in these other fields like OB that think of it more from, abstract as kind of like you're floating above the organization.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, so, and I agree. I think that it's that action research approach and a collaborative, engaged process. How do you partner with the organization while you're in the organization as a change agent to bring about change using evidence-based approaches?
Yep.
And taking an action research approach is just that. And Ken says, I am not sure what research has been done in these fields from, he says here, let me see here. I wanted to finish his comment here. Want to bring that up. It's just a humble comment. I am not sure what research has been done in these fields from evolutionary research perspectives, as evolutionary leadership research exists. I suppose the possibility of new research on WFO or RTO could be seen from this perspective. GPT suggests this as well. Digitally connected, evolutionary wired. Okay, so this is really kind of related to what you originally were talking about. He's not reacting directly to what we're talking about. But I think this really does get at what we're trying to do. It's an evidence-based approach to understanding human behavior in organizations. Right. And OBIC is more of the science behind it, and OD is more of the applied picture of it. I do see that. Well, David's here with me, and David is going to jump in, and he is with the ODC division at the Academy, and he's going to ask you another question, and we're just going to tag team back and forth and ask you a few more questions.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So what, from your understanding of the field of ODC, who are the key historical leaders and thinkers whose work anchors the field?
Well, so just on the drive in here, I was listening to the BG hosted Spotify podcast with is it Dan or was it Dan or Dave that was on there? I have to look at I missed the name, but he was talking about, he was like the second AOM chair for the OD division, and Steve, you were interviewing him, and he was going through kind of the the start of the field and into some of his work and everything. So I would say him based on what I was listening to this morning. You know who I'm speaking to, Steve?
You talking about Don Warwick?
Yes, Don Warwick. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, he definitely holds that mantle for sure. And go ahead, David.
Yeah, I
Did
was
you have
just
anything
gonna
else
say,
you want around that? Do you want to ask?
well, I think it might be, well, I think the next question might be maybe something you feel more comfortable answering. Who are current voices that are contributing or should be contributing to ODC's, to the conceptualization of ODC as a field, to its future?
Oh, you know what? Let me just pause there for a second, Dave, because I have a different way to ask Joe that first question. When you look at the field of OB, who are the most important thinkers in the field of OB? Because the social behavioral sciences are foundational to that. And I'm really curious, when you look at the field of OB, organizational behavior, who are they?
Yeah.
The most important
Yeah,
top
I
3
mean,
to 5.
sure. You certainly, we speak of Adam Grant on here. I think he is the preeminent voice as far as how to distill what we learn and how to teach it and how to make that language usable to practitioners and others that are outside the field, which I think is something that I work on constantly with, bringing the science of OB to my students, especially at the undergrad level, about using that language. I find that super interesting with that. More recently in the remote workspace, certainly, I talked about Nicholas Bloom and Ravi down at FIU and some of the work being done there. My work, I look a lot at some of the recent work in attribution theory, which I have found very useful, especially when it comes to how employees are understanding their organizational their organizations.
You're talking about Roeder's work.
Yeah, I look at it from HR perspective. You're looking at Lisa Nishi at Cornell. I think it's Susan Dania. She's done a lot with how we view our organizational practices. So in my fields, that's where I'm kind of dug in at.
Gotcha. Okay. David?
I'm thinking maybe we go on to the next section.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Models frameworks. Do you want to take that one? Or do you want me to?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. You take that one. I'll just do the one after that.
What do you see as the most important theories, models, or frameworks that inform your work?
Yeah, at the big picture, most of my work would be in social exchange theory. So we have, you have economic exchange, like I mentioned, but then social exchange, kind of that reciprocity with your organization. They're giving me valued social resources that I am then going to return with. I'm being committed to the organization, hard work, whatever those may be. So from a theory perspective, I would say I look a lot at that. Within that, the framework, certainly this employment relationship, the psychological contract would be right there. And then a lot of the cognitive behavioral science behind whether it's, attributions, kind of motivation, self-determination theory would all be ones that I'm using on a weekly basis.
Very good. And in addition to these, what theories, models, and frameworks form the foundation of ODC knowledge specifically? And maybe how might what you know from OB inform ODC?
Yeah, so, from looking at different OD models, kind of that, action research cycle, planning, implementation, evaluation, all that. I would look at it from when we begin to think about how our OD decisions, actions impact employees, and introducing some of those OB theories related to that. Some of those ideas of attributions. How are my employees understanding these decisions we're making? How are they attributing the motives behind the decisions our organizations are making? These new these new initiatives, these new interventions. How are they going to view those in terms of what is your motive for doing that? Because we all know, or with attribution theory, what it would tell us is the why is more important than the what. So while certain interventions, focus on the what, or, hey, we're rolling out this policy, we're rolling out this remote work arrangement. What's the why? Is if you don't tell your employees and communicate why you're doing this or why you think it's the right decision, they're going to fill that in their own mind. So bringing that from OB, do we think that from the HR attribution literature, employees are going to ascribe either you're doing this because you want me to perform better, or you're doing this because you are committed and you care about me. So performance can be you're trying to save costs, you're trying to get more work out of me, typically a negative attribution, versus you're committed to me as a person, you care about my health and well-being. So if we are doing rolling out an intervention or instituting a new policy, are we doing and communicating in a way that tends to make employees think that you're committed to me, you care about me, you want what's best for me, versus you're doing this from a cost center basis? Do you think remote work is better for productivity, which is why you want us back in the office, even though it's not as good for me as a person and it's not as good for my well-being? Is that the trade-off that these employees think you're making? Or is, hey, we're bringing people back in the office because we believe in collaboration and social networks, support, feedback? That to me sounds a lot, as an employee, a lot more like you're doing it because you care about me, versus it's a cost-based decision. So thinking about that when we design our interventions or working on change within organizations, how employees are going to interpret these policies and decisions and actions.
Very good. Thank you. Steve,
okay.
Next set.
Yeah. So this is really important distinction here. There's competencies that practitioners bring to this work in ODC. And there's also competencies that scholars have that bring to this work. And I'm talking specifically to the field of ODC, as both as a practitioner or a scholar. So as you think about this, two separate people, so to speak, what are you seeing as the most important competencies for a practitioner doing ODC work? And then what do you see as the most important competencies of a scholar doing scholarly work in the field of ODC? What do those scholars need to have as competencies?
Yeah, I think both. It's distilling kind of that behavioral science, that theory, language, the understanding for why these things works, and whether you're a practitioner studying OD or you're an academic, trying to work with organizations. It's being able to distill the knowledge that we learn in this academic setting to the practical setting. Talk to organizations in a way where this makes sense in how it applies to them and their real problems. Not taking what I think is an issue or a topic or something that needs to be studied from an academic perspective and bringing it to an organization saying, hey, this is why this is important to you. What's the problem? What's the situation that these organizations that they're trying to fix? Meet them where they are, not trying to bring my academic perspective to them. So being able to distill, I think, and speak the language and use what I may know academically to help organizations and helping them work on problems that they think are important.
Okay, and what do scholars need to be able to? So is there a core practitioner only skill that you think is most important that you've seen? Is there one thing that the practitioner does that a scholar doesn't do?
I would say managing some of the internal workings of their organization, whether that is the politics, the different opinions, the, kind of the, you're in there in the mud at the organization working with at that level.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about the scholars? Or one thing you would say scholars in this field need to be doing?
I think that was my first answer of just, how do we, distill and share the information that we're learning in this different setting to these organizations.
So translational
Yeah, translation is a good way to put it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right, cool. David?
So from your perspective, for someone building a strong knowledge base in ODC, what are some of the core articles or books you would consider essential to read?
Yeah, I think from the OD perspective, I've been immersed in David Coughlin's work from the action research angle side of things. That's what's kind of top of my mind.
Okay. Any contemporary resources that, well, which more contemporary resources best keep the field current and relevant? So like what would be the journals, periodicals, handbooks, digital platforms, associations, field
Yep,
relevant
absolutely. I mean,
what are some of those that you would add?
sure. I mean, right now I'm using the Change Handbook as one of the books to prop up my laptop, so I can with Peggy Howman and Steve look at using that right now. So yeah, some of the Change Handbooks. You know, I'm a big believer in the academy. So being, you know, a part of those listservs, getting the daily updates. You know, I read the OD and the HR, the OB. I think seeing that constant, you know, hey, this journal, you know, reading the table of contents coming out. Here's a call for research. I think that's from a contemporary standpoint how I stay on top of changes in the field and what those hot topics are.
Okay. Very good. Steve, do you want to ask the last questions?
Yeah, I just think as we wrap up, what do you think is the highest aspiration for the field of ODC? What is its reason for existing in the world or contributing to the world? As you see the field and its contribution, what's its highest aspiration?
Transforming organizations. You know, I think that's the only field started with that being in kind of in its byline. Like we were, you know, OD was created to transform organizations.
And if you think about that and think about the outcome variables of interest, what would you say would be the most important dependent variables to measure in that?
Well, for me, I'm going to say employee health, you know, and both from a mental but physical standpoint. You know, a big part of my background is on the finance and productivity side of things, but I think now, you know, the human-centered approach is more important than ever. You know, as we move into the, you know, AI and where the future of work seems to be going, that human-centered approach would be my number one dependent variable.
Gotcha. And what role can the field take in all of that?
You know, yeah, keeping humans keeping the employee at the center. I would say keeping that relationship between organization and employee at the center. You know, how can we make changes and develop these organizations in ways that lead to human thriving, which is going to lead to better performance.
Gotcha. Yeah. Anything, David, you want to ask or add as we wrap up?
No, I think no, it's been really great to hear your perspective, and I share your background in OB as far as my training, and so I'm grateful to hear your perspective on how you're understanding OD coming to it at this stage in your career. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks.
And for all of you out there, for those that are here, if you could put a note in, what's a takeaway from today for you from what Joe shared? What do you appreciate? What do you want to remember? Maybe what's something you'll use? So what's a takeaway for Joe? You know, for me, I think it was, and I'll just say it's really simple when I look at your research, when you look at this notion of autonomy versus isolation. It's just a model for how we balance work, right? In general, right? People need to get work done. It's like only do together what you can only do when you're together. So people need to have some connectedness. I think we spend, and what I'm taking away, we spend way too much time having people do stuff together when they shouldn't have to, having meetings that they don't need to have, having to come to work when they don't need to actually really be there. And if we can find ways to restructure work to enable that balance, I think that's going to really be helpful.
There was a really good example that I didn't get to today, but you know, say we have a problem that we need to solve and it's a really challenging one. It's like, we're going to have a meeting for that. That's actually not what you want to do. You want to give people the topic, maybe share a few viewpoints, take it home and think about it. Like, I don't know why we think that the best use of our time is like spontaneously all agreeing on something, whereas a lot of that can be done but in the background, where people have time to go through the thought process and intentional deliberation on an idea.
Yeah, that's great. And a few people said, it's giving them some real good language. They've got some really good language from you today for how to discuss this with employers. Really appreciating the human-centered approach and principle, thought leadership and impacting organizations for how we work and view work, making sustainable trust. I love that, sustainable trust between employees and employers. And just such a timely, important topic and relevant who's worked from home for 10 years, even before COVID, is, what Jillian said. And it's also been fun to see how my 10-year-old just takes working from home for granted as one valid possibility, because she's seen me do it for almost her entire life. So it's just changing the nature of work, really, is what's happening.
Absolutely, it has.
Yeah. Well, Joe,
Very
high
true.
five. Thank you for being here. David, good to see you, brother. Everybody out there, have a really great rest of the day. Dave, why don't you stay on so we can say hi? And Teo, if you got a minute, I want to check in with you as well. But otherwise, Joe, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Great. It's great meeting everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
Joe.
everybody.